You can't judge a book by its cover, right? But a good cover can make you want to read a book. And that's how I discovered The People We Keep by Allison Larkin. It was the beautiful cover of the book that caught my eye. And after reading the first paragraph, I was like, oh, I am in. Sometimes that is really all it takes. And I loved this book, Kelsey. And after finishing it, I knew we wanted to talk with Allison Larkin.
Allison Larkin is the internationally best-selling author of the novels Stay, Why Can't I Be You, and Swimming for Sunlight. Her short fiction has been published in the Somerset Review and Slice, and nonfiction in the anthologies I'm Not the Biggest Bitch in the Relationship and Author in Progress. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her husband, Jeremy.
Kelsey and I are delighted to have Allison Larkin as our guest today. Welcome to the first 50 pages, Allison.
Thank you so much, Jenn and Kelsey. I'm really happy to be talking with you.
We're pretty excited ourselves.
Yeah.
Aw, thank you.
So, for listeners who haven't read The People We Keep, can you tell us a little bit about the story?
Yes, The People We Keep is about 16-year-old folk singer April Sawicki, who's growing up in a dead-end town in a motorless motorhome that her dad won in a poker game. And after she gets into a fight with her dad, she realizes that her life could be so much bigger than it is, and that she's tired of being where she's from. And she steals a car and hits the road. And then the book follows her for about 3 years while she's finding herself in the world.
Some of the, we talk oftentimes in appeal terms for books. So your characters are really authentic. And your storyline really is a character-driven story. You started writing this book really quite a while ago.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about kind of the progress or how the characters sort of blossomed for you?
Yes, I was working on my first book, Stay, which I wrote as Allie Larkin, and I hadn't been published before, so no one was expecting anything from me, but I was in a writing group and we had 8 pages a week due, and I was working on my 8 pages for group, and I had a playlist going of songs that I liked, and I had a Dar Williams song called Iowa played, and then a song by the Waterboys called This Is the Sea played. And something about those 2 songs, the Dar Williams song, I just started thinking about what it would be like to be a folk singer and what that traveling musician life is. And then This Is the Sea has lyrics about these things that you keep, you better throw them away. And this idea of that was the river and this is the sea, that you came from this small place and you go to this big place. And for some reason, all of that just swirled together in my brain. And I had this idea of this folk singer who, I could see her with her long hair and her guitar and her struggle. And it was like a person calling to you from the corner of the room saying hey, look at me. I wrote almost 6,000 words about her right in the middle of what I was trying to do. I took those pages to my writing group. And since then, I've had this sense that I had to write this story. It was like April was in the woods and I had to write her out of it. I had to give her a good story. I had this sense of needing to complete something for her. Which I know kind of sounds crazy, but it's just what it was. And because I had such a strong sense of that, I also had such a strong sense of not wanting to compromise on the story, and that not wanting to compromise made this a book 15 years in the making of trying to find my people to tell this story. And I'm so lucky that I did, because this book is exactly what I needed it to be. I feel like it's what April needed it to be.
And I mentioned earlier, I love this book.
Thank you.
Really, I had mentioned in a previous episode, we were talking with Julia Whalen, and I said I don't often get emotional when I read a book, but I had tears at parts of the story because April is just such a great character, because I really felt as a reader that I had a connection to her in the story, and it isn't at all because our stories align in any way. Like, I do not have shared experiences that April has in the story, but there was something about how you wrote the book. And I think it's because I was able to look at April through my own life experience, and to kind of see from a different perspective where her choices were taking her. And I cared so much about her. And she really, I championed for her, but she also broke my heart sometimes too. How did April's character evolve over those 15 years for you?
It's so interesting. I mean, firstly, I do want to say I'm so excited that you spoke with Julia Whalen, because she's she narrated my first 2 audiobooks, and then we're back together for this one. And she's just, it's amazing to hear her bring my characters to life. Like, that's one of the great joys in my life, and getting to hear her read April is absolutely incredible. And she's such a good writer too. So I'm just very excited about that. But in terms of April as a character, it's interesting because I've always had a very clear sense of her, but I'm 44 now. And so in the 15 years that I was writing this book, my perspective on everything has changed. And I think realizing the intense sadness of April's situation, where she couldn't quite see it, because when you're young, you don't have the perspective to understand your circumstances the same way. And that is in some ways such a beautiful survival mechanism. If you don't know that the way that you're living is not ideal, if you can't see that there's a better way for you, it does help you plod along. So, you can't really feel sorry for yourself if you don't think there's better. So that was an interesting evolution to have with her. In the beginning, when I was writing it, I recognized some of the sadness, but as I got older, I saw it more clearly. And it actually became a harder book to write in some ways, because I wanted to do it right. I had the sense of wanting to do it right, and not putting my feelings of April's circumstances into April's feelings of her circumstances, but also allowing the reader to see more than, April was necessarily aware of. And it is in first person present tense. So that's an interesting tool to play with. And it comes down to her sensory experiences and her observations, even when she can't always connect the dots on her observations to come to a resolution about them.
And great storytelling, kind of from my perspective, and especially here with this book with the great characterization. It can almost act as a mirror to your own life experiences, allowing you to see the consequences of your own choices, but in a very safe way. And throughout this book, I found myself reflecting on the people that I've kept throughout my life. And I think that was part of what made it that emotional journey for me, reading this story, reading April's character.
I think that, April's circumstances are, her life is different from mine. There's definitely, I think the feelings are real, but the facts are made up, But I think one of the great struggles as a human being is to not only find love from the people around us, but feel like we're worthy of accepting it. And that, I think, is just one of the greatest human universals, So it's an interesting arena to play in. And it's a connecting thing. And I think, just getting, I think I had to free up something in myself a little bit to admit that to myself, about myself, that's one of my great struggles is that idea of, wow, I love this person's so great. Am I good enough for them? Like, do I deserve, if they know all of me, will they love me? And, I think that's an interesting thing in terms of evolving with the book too, over this amount of time, is just my own process in life, and being able to see why these people would love April, because I have a better understanding of why the people I love me.
So we've kind of touched on April a lot, which is great. She's the main character. We want to really dive into her. But an element that I thought was really interesting, because you don't necessarily see it in a ton of fiction, is experiencing homelessness. She's experiencing it as a teen in the beginning. And this part of the story, really kind of gives us pause, or, we talk about it a lot in different library meetings, is, because every day in the public library, really anywhere in this country, it's not unique to our city or even our own library that we see people of all ages experiencing homelessness. And kind of after, hearing what April goes through, I know Jenn and I talked about this, that, you really kind of have to like sit with it for a while and kind of think about, how to even think about homelessness, or how to even, understand it and be, I don't even know.
Yeah, and to think about the kind of people that we want to be for the people that we encounter daily who are experiencing these things. And, April really does encounter throughout the story some of the best versions of humanity, and also some of the worst versions of humanity. And, specifically, this is kind of a side note. As I was in the middle of this book, I was working at the library, and we had a young man who came in and was asking for some different things. And it came out that he was homeless in the community. And, it really made me think about his situation in a little bit different light, being in the middle of the story. And it made me want to really be like one of the good people, the helpful people, because we do experience that every day.
Yeah. And I mean, that is an amazing thing to look at what somebody else is going through as a situation that you can show up and help, that you can show up and be the best that you can. And I mean, that is an amazing thing about libraries too, is that they are absolutely there for everybody. And that is a great comfort and a great resource. One of the concepts that I was really dealing with just as a person in general, at one point I was listening to a lot of Brené Brown, and she talks about the concept of like, are people doing the best that they can? And I think in dealing with that concept, especially in this book, really changed me as a person and how I think about things, because everybody is a product of their circumstances. And if you think that if people really are doing the best that they can, we do have to look at a lot of things differently. We have to look at homelessness differently. We have to look at poverty differently. We have to look at everything differently. If people are just doing the best they can, and maybe we can be the element that adds a new trajectory, or even just some comfort. I think that's a beautiful way to start thinking. Like, I'm grateful for the experience of my mind starting to head in that direction. It makes the world a nicer place, really.
I'll second that. I listen to Brené Brown a lot, and she does make you think about things all the time. Like, you're like, I think I'm finally grasping what she's saying, and then she introduces a new concept or something, and you're like, oh, like my mind's blown, and then I have to like think about it for the next week of just
the work is never over, right? We're always doing the work.
Yes.
It's not just April that really shines in this book as an amazing character. I really feel like your secondary characters in the story are fantastic. I love Margot. I love Ethan. I think that, my wish is that everyone has an Ethan in their life, like someone to you just show up and be present and, for them no matter what. And this concept of found family is one of those themes that really runs through the story. And just kind of going back to characters, do your secondary characters reflect elements of people that you've kept along the way?
Absolutely. They're not, nobody's specifically one person. You can't there's no translation that's direct in any way, shape, or form. But that whole concept of found family, I'm so lucky to have truly amazing friends. I'm so lucky to have friends who have been in my life for a very long time, and friends that I met in the most random ways who just have completely changed my life. And so that's something that's the way I see the world. So that's the way that it happened in my book. But I can see Margot and Ethan and Carly are a conglomeration of the feelings that I've had for certain people in my life. Margot especially. I worked in restaurants and bars when I was younger. I worked answering phones in a company at one point. I had all these older women who really took me under their wing. And also in my writing group when I was living in Rochester, New York, my friend Joan, who isn't like Margot in most ways. She was actually a law librarian. She passed away a couple of years ago, but she just took me under her wing so much and so kindly showed me the good parts of myself and helped me figure out how to be an adult, and had so much wisdom and perspective to share. And because I was working on this book for so long, she was a part of it too. She helped me with editing when I got feedback on the book that what if April were nicer, or what if she stayed in the same place and had friends her own age. Joan would read the book again and say, no, I don't know what they're talking about. You need to do what you need to do. And so I think, Margot's a little bit of a tribute to her, even though they're just very, very different people. But there's that heart there of the people who come in and just they're themselves, and they're kind, and they're persistent, and they change your life.
And I think that's what helps to make them so authentic in the story.
So obviously place is, also a very important part of this story, and kind of almost becomes a character in and of itself. I know both Jen and I are kind of like, we should look up to see if Little River is an actual town.
Little River is not an actual town. It is kind of an amalgam of a bunch of towns that I've visited. I grew up in a town that was very small when I grew up, but it was outside of New York City, so it had a different feel. But it was that thing where everybody kind of knew everybody. And then when I moved upstate and I lived in Rochester, New York, I got to visit a bunch of the smaller towns outside of Rochester and Buffalo and got a feel for that. But it is a town of my own making, mostly because I wanted the freedom to tell it like I saw it, and I wouldn't want to do that to anybody's town. Ithaca, New York, obviously, though, is a real place and one of my favorite places in the whole world. So I wanted to write Ithaca the way it is.
One of the other things that Kelsey and I were talking about is the 1990s as historical fiction, which makes me feel, my age, but...
Yeah. So I feel like, the story wouldn't really work in the same way in another time period. So as much as it pains me to think about the 1990s as historical fiction, I feel like it had to be, set before smartphones and GPS and text messages and social media.
Yes. I think like even just if April could have had MapQuest, if she could have gone to a library and printed out maps, that would have changed everything about everything. I think she would have gone much further on her road travels. I think there's just a lot of things that would have been different, even if she could have sent an email to someone when she stopped into the library, So I wanted to keep it there. It's also when I was in Ithaca, so I wanted to have that texture. And I did wonder if it was going to get get categorized as historical fiction. I mean, I know if you set a film in like 2010 now, it's a period piece because you have to change all the all the technology and all the elements. You can't have
to me.
anachronisms. Yeah, it's very, very strange. But it is this funny thing. I'm amused by it, and like it almost hurts my feelings, but then why would it hurt my feelings? We're just the age we are, and age is a good thing. I'm happy to be here.
But it was interesting to think about the story through that lens. Like, someone younger might think, well, why didn't she just send a text message? That would be your natural reaction. But there were limitations to what she had access to in the world, and it really does shape the story.
Yes, especially even coming from Little River. And I saw something at one point where someone had mentioned that she just seemed unbelievably naive. And I thought we were all unbelievably naive.
Yeah.
Like, if you think about how a child functions in the world now versus how we functioned in the world back then, you only knew what people told you or what you could find in a book. You were completely, or in a magazine, or what you could hear on the radio. And, I grew up getting New York City radio stations, but some of the people that I went to Ithaca with came from smaller towns, and they had like local radio that did not play any of the music that I had been listening to. We were so separate and segmented. And I thought that was fascinating to play with.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of music, music is such an important part of this story of who April is. And I really love that you make her a folk singer, because it really is, it makes her even more vulnerable, when she's on stage.
Yeah.
Because those live, as I don't know this, I don't sing, or I'm not musically inclined, but you do sing and play guitar. Is that right, Allison?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
So I think you would understand like the rawness of, being on stage, the level of intimacy that you have with an audience. And we are in Iowa, right? So I had never heard, speaking of being from a small town and not ever hearing music, I don't know, I had never heard the Dar Williams song Iowa. And so I had, of course, Google it, because we can, and listen to the song. And I was just like, how have I grown up living here and I didn't know about this beautiful song? And I watched a live performance. And
isn't it gorgeous?
It is. And then, then it made me think even more about live performance and music and vulnerability of that, and just music as storytelling. So that was just me talking about it. But I'd love to hear your, kind of thoughts on why you incorporated that into the story.
I grew up on a really steady diet of folk music. I was actually named after a Gordon Lightfoot song, and I saw a Gordon Lightfoot in concert. I saw like the Everly Brothers when I was younger. I listened to a lot of Simon and Garfunkel, all of that, James Taylor, Carole King. And then when I got to Ithaca, just on a chance, one of my friends said, you got to come see this guy play. He's amazing. He plays on the subway in Boston all the time. And I just went down to the little coffee house on campus and saw Peter Mulvey play, and thought, and it was more contemporary folk music. And I thought, wow, this is exactly my music. Like, this is what I want to be listening to. And so I've been following his career since like 1995. I've been to so many of his shows now. And I think that's a huge part of it too, because he really embodies the classic folk singer in that, he's a modern day philosopher, and he's thinking about the big concepts and the little concepts of life. And so that was just exciting. And then a lot of the music I listen to comes from people he's performed with too. The lyrics at the opening of the book are from Chris Perica, from a song called Compass Rose, And I listen to Chris Perica so much. I think she's one of my favorite musicians. She's just absolutely brilliant. And that song changed the trajectory of this book for me, because when I was getting pressure to change things, to make April nicer, to make this book fit in a neat little box, I heard that song Compass Rose and kept listening to it. And she deals with the concept of a song, she sings about, I know someday I'll offer up a song I was made to play. And I really got obsessed with those words and started thinking about that in terms of my book, that this was the book I was made to write. And if this was the book I was made to write, I just had to do it my way. So in so many different ways, music was a part of this book. And also, my past playing, I played a couple open mic nights when I was younger. I actually just posted a song that I wrote that's in the book that I had played at an open mic night when I was in my 20s. I studied voice. So my experience with that is definitely in the visceral connections of April playing music. But I'm not necessarily a musician per se. But I think that music parallels writing, parallels painting, in terms of that vulnerability that you have to protect so that you can make the good work, and then you have to put it out there. And do you try to stay vulnerable, or do you put your armor on? How do you go out into the world as a creative person? I feel like I took that so many very directions, but
it was really a lot. You mentioned the pressure to change your characters and to change your story to fit in a different mold. And so you did have challenges, like you said, bringing this story, to find, an agent and a publisher to, really support you and champion this book. And I think, that's kind of like the nature of publishing, right? I mean, that's, you have success and they want you to replicate success. From some of the other things I've read, it sounds like you've really been able to surround yourself with just really amazing women writers who have acted as mentors and friends to you. Can you talk a little bit about how that has helped you through this process too?
Yes, absolutely. One of the biggest gifts in my career is that when I was first starting out, Claire Cook invited me to be part of an online group that she was in at the time, and it's called the Fiction Writers Co-op. And it's been a revolving door to some extent, but we've kept strong at 50 members, and we all just kind of talk about what we're going through and support each other and cheer on when we have a book launch. And so I've writing such a solitary thing, but I've had coworkers this whole time, and I've had people to talk with and share my fears with and my disappointments. And it's a great thing to be able to be part of a team when you're a novelist. So I'm very lucky for that. And I think that also just set me up to be a person who thinks of this existence as a writer that way, which is beautiful because I have all these friends who are novelists, and we swap manuscripts and we support each other, and it makes everything so much better. I'm really thankful for that.
And I think you also now get to be an example to others that it is possible. It's not easy, but it is possible. And one of the things I noticed on your website, AllieLarkinWrites.com, is you do have a writer resources tab.
Yes.
Did you want to talk at all about that?
Yeah, I put my query letter up there from when I was submitting my first book because I wanted people to see an example, and I have links and some answers to questions. I also do sometimes take on a limited number of manuscripts as a developmental editor, so there's information about that there too. But one of the things I just really I want to be a little bit transparent about the work behind the process. And also, you mentioned that it's doable, but it's difficult. And the thing I think that's interesting about it is that so many of us think that the difficulty is telling us something about our talent or our work's viability. And it's just hard because it's hard. And you just, if you love something, you keep going. And then you'll find the right spot for your work. Like not everything is for everybody, but you're finding, you're trying to build the people who are for you. And I definitely, I don't ever want to see someone get discouraged for, you know, for on something that they love and they feel, because the business can be brutal, but the business and the work are two separate things.
And I think being in a creative profession by nature is very vulnerable.
Yes.
Because, there are critics and readers, and, you put your work out there and then people react to it. And I think that's a very vulnerable, and I think you just have to embrace that vulnerability and understand that rejection is part of it. And that, that's probably a hard place to get to.
It is one of the things that's helped me so much. Like this book was such a good teacher in that, and I've been so proud of my first 3 books too. I really do love them. But this one, I wasn't really on the same page with the people I had been working with, so I really had to fight for my vision and finding the right place for my vision. And what I realized is that when you create just for yourself. I mean, there was a point where I was writing this book where I thought, I'm just writing it for me. I'm not even going to try to sell it. It's just my book. I just need to do this. So I'm going to write it exactly the way I want to. And, scrubbed out all the advice I'd taken that didn't fit. And I think that makes you a little rejection proof. I wrote this book for me. So it's wonderful if you love it. And if you don't love it, then it's just not for you, and that's okay. But I think when you try to bend yourself into somebody else's vision, then criticism hurts really badly. But if you do something to try to get to a sense of rightness with it for yourself, then it's easier to just brush off somebody not liking it. It's like, okay, that's fine. There's plenty of things I don't like too. We're all entitled to like things and not like things.
And I have one of those library standard learning things is for every book a reader.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And one of those famous library quotes
that's beautiful.
Gets bandied about all the time.
Yeah.
Were there any reader reactions that have surprised you about the people we keep?
I am honestly surprised by how many people understand it on such a visceral level. I'm so honored by that. I've had books that did that for me, and so I'm just awed. I'm so grateful. It makes the world feel like a friendlier place. It's like I put my heart out there, and other people said, "Yeah, that's what my heart feels like." I knew some people would feel like that. I don't know that I thought this was going to, because of what I'd been told over the years, I didn't know that this was going to be a book with such broad appeal. And I'm so thankful that it is. It's thrilling. It's absolutely thrilling. I feel like there are just kindred spirits everywhere.
And it is a hopeful and moving story, even though there are difficult parts of the book. But I don't mean difficult. It's very accessible to read.
Yes.
But some of the situations, that April is in are they're it's not a rom-com, right?
No, it is not a rom-com. Yeah, by any means.
Yeah. And this book just published in August of this year, so it is still finding its way into the hands and the hearts of readers. And yeah, we hope that some of our listeners today will decide that they want to spend some time with April. Yeah.
Thank you. I do hope so. I really do.
Are you working on another book now, Allison, or do you get to take a break?
I'm always working on something. One of the things that I learned when I was writing this book is that I can write. I wrote 3 books while I was writing this one. So I've learned that I can write more than one thing at a time, and that jotting ideas down and stepping away is actually very helpful for my process. So I actually have 3 things, like 3 other projects that I've been marinating, and I'm, adding to them and seeing which one will hit critical mass and take off.
Well, wow. We will definitely keep our eyes peeled.
So when you have time to read for pleasure, it doesn't sound like you have a lot of extra time, but when you do, what kind of story do you seek out? And would you mind sharing what you're currently reading or listening to?
Sure. I don't have a lot of time, which is why I love audiobooks. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I just finished Apples Never Fall, which was excellent in audio. I also listen to a lot of nonfiction. I like a lot of like psychology books and, like The Body Keeps Score and things along those lines. There's a book called Life Unlocked that talks about fear on a really interesting level. So I listened to that, and it was great. Bronson Pinchot narrates that one. Oh. But I do also read a lot. I loved Matt Norman's new book. It was really fun. It had like a big chill feel to it and really heartwarming. Yeah.
It goes right back into the 70s thing. Like when you were talking about music, Mark was sitting here laughing at me that when we've talked about music as a group, like I've listed off every single one of those artists. So he's just like, oh, really? You found somebody else that likes what you do.
That's amazing.
I think that one of the things that is timeless about singer-songwriters and different decades and those genres of music is that it's simple, it's accessible, but the feelings are profound and universal. And of course we all love it.
Yes. Yeah. We all go through those life stages and those feelings.
Well, we've talked about how much we love The People We Keep. So we highly recommend that listeners check out The People We Keep by Allison Larkin. It has been a pleasure to talk with you today. Thank you so much for joining us on the first 50 pages.
Thank you, Jenn and Kelsey. I really appreciate it. It's great to get to talk with you.
Yeah, thank you so much.